To Richard Saunders and all the cool cats at the Skeptic Zone podcast, congratulations on 777 lucky episodes. This one's for you, baby. Luck be a lady tonight. Luck be a lady tonight. Luck if you've ever been a lady to begin with. Luck be a lady. Luck be a lady. Luck be a lady tonight. And now here's lucky episode 777.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 777. And a big thank you to my friend George Hrab for that musical introduction. Good to hear from you, George. Richard Saunders here in Oakland, California. And next week's show will be coming to you from Bend, Oregon. But more about that later. Coming up on this week's show, Adrienne Hill looks at the number 777 or 777. And like just about any number, there are interesting things attached to it, intertwined with it. I wouldn't go so far as to say numerology, but it has to do with numbers. 777 with Adrienne Hill. Following that, I talked to my old friend Rob Palmer about psychics. We chat about psychics, and specifically those ones who con and rip people off, the con sharks, the people who know full well what they're doing. And I always make this point. When I say the word psychic, read people who claim psychic abilities or people who pretend they have psychic abilities. Rob Palmer, the well-known skeptic, coming up on today's show. Then we have the return of, Adrienne Hill, because she was in the earlier part of the show. Adrienne Hill returns with Australian Skeptics News, the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, written, of course, by Tim Mendham. And in the Trove segment this week, we're looking at ancient Egyptian curses. And that's not when the pharaoh stubbed his toe either. What are some of the Australian newspaper references to the curses of ancient Egypt? Now, if you remember a couple of episodes ago, I chatted to Kenny Biddle about spirit boxes or ghost boxes, these handheld radios that flit around the frequencies. They scan. They lock onto a frequency for a fraction of a second and scan to the next frequency. And during that time, you might hear a fraction of a word. And we were discussing the TV appearance not so long ago of Cale O'Donnell, the latest psychic wonder kid on the block who claims to be Australia's best psychic. And he, on the TV appearance, had the spirit box PSB7T. And Kenny Biddle happened to have the same model of spirit box in his collection, although it wasn't working. But since then, Kenny has got the spirit box to work, and he sent me this recording. I wonder what the spirits were trying to tell us in that recording. But of course, with this device, you can change the amount of time you hear any frequency. By that I mean how long the radio scanner stops on any particular frequency to let you hear a bit of it. And the longer you have the setting, the more of the word you hear. On the TV show, Cale O'Donnell had his set at 100 milliseconds. So you only hear a tiny fraction of any broadcast, a little bit of a word. Whereas Kenny was able to alter his, and, well, the illusion just disappears as you hear more and more of the radio broadcast. I'm quite tempted to buy one of these for myself and run around a graveyard in Sydney. I wonder if I should do that. A bit of a pointless exercise, I'm afraid, but sounds like a lot of fun. A big shout out if it's your birthday today, or maybe somebody in your family is having a birthday today. I like birthdays. I think we should have one every year. I've got more to say at the end of the show, but now it's time for me to run around the corner and buy a bag of corn candy or candy corn. Because even though Halloween is months away, the stores here in the United States have Halloween stuff already for sale. And I know a certain group of nephews and nieces back in Australia who just love candy corn. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. You can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, and today I'm going to talk about the number 777. Why? Well, because it is the 777th episode of the Skeptic Zone podcast. And because it's an interesting number. It's so interesting that it even has its own Wikipedia page. While I know some of you will be anxiously waiting for some obscure math facts, I will leave those for your personal reading. And yes, there are quite a few, including it being an extravagant or wasteful number, a lucky number, a polite number, and an amenable number. Check out Wikipedia if you want the mathematical lowdown on what those entail. Beyond the math facts, we find out about the Boeing 777, which is a long-range twin-engine jetliner first released in June of 1995. There have been several versions of the 777, including, but not limited to, the 777-200, the 777-300, and the still in development 777-8 and 777-9, which are part of the 777-X line. I wonder if the Boeing executives have been giving Elon Musk some ideas. And regarding gambling, as I discussed in episodes 696 and 700, we discovered that the number 7 could be considered both good and bad luck. When it comes to gambling, it clearly is supposed to make you think you will have good luck. And our favorite number 3 comes into play too, since there are 3 sevens. According to wizardslots.com, quote, "The Greek philosopher Pythagoras said perfect things come in threes. Therefore, 3 is also a unique number throughout history. And sometimes 7s can appear in singles, doubles, or triples. Usually, a 777 symbol can trigger a potentially high payout if it features in a winning spin." End quote. If a banknote has a serial number with the 3 numbers 777 together somewhere, it is valued by collectors and numismatists. And there's my new word of the week. Never heard of it before. A numismatist, according to Wikipedia, is a specialist who studies and/or collects currency. As a result of the popularity of this number, the United States Mint and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing sell uncirculated $1 bills with 777 somewhere in the serial number. Then there is the 777 Tower, a 52-story office building in downtown Los Angeles. Its name comes from its address, 777 South Figueroa Street. Now, leaving Wikipedia, this past June, I was in Greeley, Colorado, which is south of South Greeley, Wyoming. Jesus, Murphy, I thought I was directionally challenged. So I was in Greeley to watch my son, Cameron, compete in the World Long Drive competition. And no, he didn't have to drive around the world in a vehicle. He competes in trying to hit a golf ball further than other people. And at the competition, there was this young fellow who was clearly superstitious. He brought a Bible up to the tee, placing it carefully where he could see it, and made the sign of the cross before starting to hit golf balls. And while he was hitting, I noticed some unusual markings on his golf gloves. He had several proverbs and the number 777 written multiple times on both gloves in what appeared to be a black Sharpie. Not having a religious background, I was interested in what this might signify. I have discovered that according to the Bible, Noah's father lived to be 777 years old, and in the Orthodox Study Bible, 777 represents the Trinity. Lastly, on the website astrology.com, quote, according to numerology, angel number 777 symbolizes spiritual awakening, enlightenment, and divine guidance. This number deeply resonates with personal growth, inner wisdom, and inner knowing. It resonates with the vibration of the number 7, which relates to introspection, intuition, analytical thinking, spirituality, and wisdom. 777s amplify the energies and vibration of the number 7, creating a powerful, divine message that is hard to ignore. End quote. Well, based on this, I think we can all agree that Skeptic Zone listeners, especially after listening to 777 episodes, are wise and have inner knowing. They know that this is nothing more than word salad. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
G'day, Dr. Karl here, popping up on your beloved Richard Saunders podcast, inviting you to follow me on TikTok, where things are much faster. And it all has to happen in a minute or less. So, why do diet drinks get you drunker? For example, a rum and diet cola versus a rum and regular cola. Why do we hear the ocean in a seashell? Is coffee good or bad for you? With regard to farts, what happens when you hold them in, and why do farts smell worse in the shower? And the old wooden spoon, as used in cooking, does have a very porous surface, so in terms of bacteria, is it safe to use? And of course, we all know that destiny shapes our ends, but so do the natural electrical fields that we generate, and marijuana munchies might be related to a 500-million-year-old mutation that makes eating enjoyable via our natural cannabinoids that our body makes. Just follow me on TikTok, at Dr. Karl, DRKARL, to find out the answer to all these questions and more.
Now, folks, over the last few weeks on the Skeptic Zone, we've been discussing psychics. Oh yes, psychics, especially the ones who claim to talk with the dead via the radio. That's very strange. The particular psychic we were mentioning some weeks ago when the spirit box came up, or the ghost box, was one Cale O'Donnell. And Cale O'Donnell in Australia claims to charge, may well charge, $800 an hour to contact your dear departed. Now, this topic has raised a few eyebrows, none more than my friend and partner in crime in the USA, none other than the well-known skeptic, Rob Palmer. Hello, Rob.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
So, Rob, I know that you take a very keen interest in this whole issue of people talking with the dead, as you do with many other skeptical topics, but particularly when people say, well, what's the harm? It's only a bit of fun. It's only a bit of nonsense. If only that were true. What's been your experience in this?
Well, I first learned that this was more than just, a parlor trick that would keep people entertained for $5 back in, 2017, I think it was. There was a podcast, I don't think it's being produced anymore, called Skepticality. And right. Derek, right? I think that was the host name.
Derek Colanduno, yes, a wonderful man, yes.
I didn't listen to that a lot, but I just happened to randomly catch one where he was interviewing a private eye named Bob Nygaard. And Bob specializes in helping victims of psychic fraud. I had never really, thought about the issue of how much people are losing to con artists like this. It was just, I always understood that I thought it was as Susan Gerbic and Mark Edward have come up with the name grief vampires. I understood that, it's emotionally draining, but I never really even thought about how bad this could be financially on people. And that's what Bob, talks about, because he gets, his job is to try to get justice for victims who've been ripped off for, I kid you not, it could be millions of dollars. Some, or your life savings, whatever that is. Sometimes that's tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds, and people have lost millions of dollars to an individual psychic con artist because they believe in this stuff.
It's frightening to think about because, as I said before, a lot of psychics out there, and folks, whenever I say the word psychics, it's shorthand. I mean, I can't think of a better term which is more, a better term might be more than a mouthful. People who have claimed psychic ability or whatever. So we used to use the shorthand term psychics. What we mean, of course, are people claiming psychic power, or scam artists, or people who are sincerely deluded. Take your pick. But a lot of here's the word again, psychics out there, especially in my experience, will charge, I don't know, $30, $40 a reading at a fair or something like that. What we're talking about are the people who charge significantly more than that. And in the part that Bob Nygaard played, and he really does look like a detective. It's quite amazing. I've met the man. He's straight out of Central Casting as a New York detective.
He plays the part. Do you know that they did an episode of a TV show where they were going to have an actor play him, and after the auditions, and Bob was on set as an advisor, and after the auditions, the guy who was in charge of casting said, no one can play you. You play yourself. Bob played himself.
It does not surprise me. But the sort of people he's going after, now these are the calculated people. For these people, the business is scamming, isn't it? It's really like organized crime.
Yeah, absolutely. It's families of people who do this generation after generation and teach their children, often the girls, to do it, and that's what they do. They take advantage of the fact that people believe in this, and they wholeheartedly believe it. And and this is because everyone around them says they believe it. 40% of Americans or more believe in psychics. You can hardly turn on a cable station, and not find some psychic that's particular to that channel. Whether it's Tyler Henry, the Long Island Medium, Matt Fraser, right? And so this portrays it like it's a real thing. So if you believe that, well, why not go to your neighborhood psychic who's giving you a first free reading, and how much can it cost after that? And then, because you have this full belief in it, if they're a con artist, and there are a lot of them out there, they will take advantage of you as far as they can take it. And to some people, it bankrupts them.
In Australia, the experience has been with the people who are posing as psychics or whatever, mystics. They will target certain ethnic minorities in Australia, people from certain parts of the world. And the big red flag for us, and it's probably the same here in the United States, where I'm at the moment, is people say they will remove a curse.
Yeah, that's you hear that all the time. That's what Bob tells me. That's a big one.
And not only that, I've heard that they'll say, you must bring your money from the bank to me, and I will remove the bad luck from your money. And of course, they do remove the bad luck from the money and the money as well.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thing. It plays on not only paranormal belief, but spiritual and, dare I say, religious beliefs. I actually asked Bob when I interviewed him for my column, do you see a difference regarding the religiosity of the people who fall for this? And he says, oh, that's interesting. I've never had a victim who is an atheist. I can't say that there aren't any, but just none of mine have been. So these people play up on your spiritual beliefs, and there was actually a story, and I don't remember if this was one of Bob Nygaard's clients or he just told me about someone else, but a woman had a miscarriage, and she goes to a psychic because she was pregnant again, and she was concerned she was going to have another miscarriage. And tell me the future. Is this baby going to go okay? Is there anything I can do? Yeah. And of course, like you talked about, a curse. Yes, she had a curse on her, and she was hundreds of thousands of dollars in to try to remove the bad juju and aura around her so the next baby wouldn't, die. And then that wasn't enough. After she got the money for that, she told her, I see the soul of that first child who was premature and died before they were born, some kind of purgatory or hell. And if I go for special training, which is going to cost a lot of money, which you'll have to give me, I can get them out of that situation. Their soul will be free to go to heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it fascinating that a lot of psychics, in my experience, don't forget, folks, when I say the word psychics, you know what I mean, at various mind, body, spirit fairs or wallet fairs or whatever the case may be, will often invoke a sort of a Christian take on the whole God question. And I find that endlessly fascinating. Here they are talking about ghosts and the dead and everything else, but they'll weave that with God is looking after you and the angels are here and, all this sort of talk. And a very popular line these people take are either guardian angels or spirit guides. It's a very common rouge technique. Hello, sir, how do you do? Sit down. Oh, yes, your great-grandmother on your father's side. She's your guardian angel. And spirit is telling me yada, 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 yada. They really like to throw around these terms. And it occurred to me a long time ago that the people who are more inclined to believe in angels, for example, they've already been primed in a way.
Yeah. So there was I've talked about this topic. I talked about this at PsyCon, at Dragon Con, about 10 other times. I find it very important to get this out in the public. And one of the slides I show is a Pew Research poll, I think it was from 2018, about Americans' belief in the paranormal. And they broke it up into different things. And one I pulled out was in psychics. And, I don't think that this is largely different in any other country, but, their survey was of Americans. And they broke it up by religiosity. They only had Christian denominations. I don't know why that was. But amongst the Christian denominations, it ranged maybe by plus or minus 5%. But it was essentially somewhere between 38 and 42% of Christians believe in this kind of stuff. Interestingly, if you put down I'm non-denominational or spiritual, then it was over 50%. Huh. So that was quite fascinating. And the only inoculation, I'll say, and even this wasn't 100%, like most vaccines aren't 100%, was if you put down atheist, then you're only 10% likely to believe in a psychic. That astounds me right there, because that means you're not skeptical. You're an atheist, but you're not skeptical because you still believe in the afterlife and that these people have these kind of powers.
Well, people believe in psychics from all walks of life, but I think people are more susceptible if they already have an established belief in, as I say, angels, for example.
Yeah, and I wonder, of course, they didn't follow up with this in the survey, but the people who were listed themselves as spiritual and not affiliated with a formal religion, and they were a good 10 points higher than the religious Christians. Is that because they were of that mindset before, and that's why they came out of a religion or never got into a religion, or I don't know. I don't know if that, if that is a connection there, if it's a correlation or a causation, I don't know. But that's fascinating too.
Well, it's also one of the ways that, a comeback. I've never tried this myself, but if I was in the situation where somebody said to me, blah, 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 and your guardian angel, blah, 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 is now looking after you or guiding you or something, I'd say, well, I have a lot of private time. I don't want somebody looking at me. I mean, do they stop at certain hours? Are they? Is this like a spy network? It's a real concern. I mean,
that bothered me, Richard, when I was a young boy and I was a Catholic. Yeah, is God watching me right now?
Well, not just God, but if you've got a special guardian angel dedicated to you, it's like, well, I mean, what are your hours? Do you clock on? I mean, should I not do certain things when at certain hours? It doesn't occur to people because it's just a warm, fuzzy, you are being loved and your great uncle, whatever, somebody out there is looking after you and guiding you and loving you. I can see the appeal in that sort of language.
So the bad, second shoe that drops on this is, okay, so you believe in this to that extent. You go to your local neighborhood psychic and they're a full-blown con artist and they're going to take you for everything they can get from you, which often is a lot. And then the second shoe is, well, okay, now you realize after something happens, you finally talk to a friend and says, you're being taken advantage of, and you go to the cops, I want my money back, at least in the US. And I'm curious to see what you think about, what you know about this from Australia, Richard. In the US, you're screwed. The criminal justice system blames you. Bob Nygaard tells me that people go into the police station and go, did they have a gun to your head? Why'd you give them the money? That kind of a thing. And then if you get past that hurdle, you need to have a district attorney who's going to, amongst all the other things they have to do, try to prosecute that to a jury who may believe in psychics and also is going to think she didn't put a gun to your head. So, it's very hard to get justice in this situation. So Bob tells me he gets 4 or 5 calls a day from people who have lost huge sums of money and are looking for help from him. And the really sad thing is he's one person. He retired from the police force, I think it's 15 years ago at this point. At some point he's going to retire from this. He's not in an agency. There's no other person in this country, and I haven't heard about it anywhere else, where anyone or an agency specializes in this. And according to him, you really need to be a specialist. Yeah. He was a former cop. He knew the ins and outs. He knew who to talk to. You can't just say, I'm going to sign up and help people with this, because it ain't going to work in the justice system. So what's your understanding of the Australian system in regard to how illegal this is and how victims can get justice?
It's an interesting one, because I do believe there have been cases, especially where these palm readers who will remove curses type story. And it's probably worth me investigating thoroughly to see what the rate of prosecution or whatever it is. It's really difficult because people typically won't go to report they've been scammed by a psychic.
Absolutely. That is another thing Bob has mentioned. Yeah. There was one person, he said, I think it was a college professor, called Bob up and said, I want to tell you about the psychic. And he told him the whole story. So, okay, I think I could take this case. He goes, no. I only lost $250,000. And that sounds like a lot of money, but it's not worth my reputation at my university. I'm not bringing this out in public.
Yeah. Well, and also a lot of people don't, even when they've been conned, they won't acknowledge they've been conned. They might blame themselves. They might say, well, the spirits weren't talking to me that day. And coupled with the fact that a lot of these so-called psychics out there, in my experience at least, and this was the experience of James Randi too, a lot of them are sincere. They're not out to con people. They think they're delivering a real service to these people. And I made the point a couple of weeks ago when I was being interviewed on TV. This part didn't make it to the TV segment. I said, when it gets down to it, it's a case for consumer affairs, because these people who call themselves psychics are running a business. And the business is to talk to the dead. If they're not talking to the dead, doesn't that contravene some business practice or
cleansing auras or removing curses if you're not?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's an interesting angle. It's really difficult. It's not like somebody robbing a bank where the police can come and prosecute them.
So Bob tells me that in the jurisdictions where he's tried to help people in the U.S., he cannot prosecute if they've just given them money for whatever they claimed it was. They say $100,000 to cleanse your aura. Okay, here it is. Your aura has been cleansed. He can't fight that.
Yeah, wow.
Because they said a service was given, even though, as we know, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
Right. The only kinds of cases he can prosecute is when you started talking about it. Take this huge amount of money, give me all your jewelry, and I'm going to take the purse off of it, and I will give it back to you. And then they don't give it back.
Yes.
Right? Because that's outright theft. That apparently is the only kind in the U.S.
Wow.
that
Interesting.
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of laws in Australia about, consumer laws, about getting what you paid for and so on. We might pursue that more vigorously in the future. It's a tricky one. It's a very tricky one. Rob, psychics, the bane of our existence, but I'm sort of glad they're around in a way that gives us something to talk about.
I'd rather talk about aliens, not abducting people or mutilating cows.
Maybe you're right. Oh, by the way, before you go, Rob, you interviewed me just recently on the interwebs about UFOs. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, I did. I decided to have a conversation with Richard Saunders for Skeptical Inquirer. I have a series in my column of video interviews, a conversation with, because I heard the Skeptic Zone episode about UFOs and then Richard's TikTok about UFOs, and I learned he was really knowledgeable on the subject, and I thought it would be fun to sit down and have a talk with him on the subject. And we did. So yeah, that's the latest article in Skeptical Inquirer. It was just out today. It says, talk about UFOs, a conversation with Richard Saunders.
Folks, I will link to that in the show notes so you can see Rob and I chewing the fat about aliens and UAPs and UFOs and flying saucers. And maybe next year there'll be an even more interesting term for alien spaceships. I like the term alien spaceships.
I am so waiting for the revelation of that giant one that's as big as a football field and it's being hidden under a building. I swear to you, Richard, my prediction is it's under the Las Vegas Sphere, and I'm going to go look when I'm there for PsyCon in October.
I've heard that's an amazing thing. I'm sorry I won't be able to see that this year. Rob Palmer, the well-known skeptic. Where can people find out more about what you do?
Oh, you can Google Rob Palmer, not Robert Palmer, or you get this famous singer who is irresistible. Rob Palmer and Skeptical Inquirer, and you'll get all of my articles.
Rob Palmer, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
You've probably heard the saying, knowledge is power. While that's true, there's just too much to know. Plus, we carry access to nearly all of humanity's knowledge in our pockets. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of misinformation out there. Conspiracy theories, propaganda, pseudoscience, science denial, all of which are effective because they appeal to our biases and emotions. As Richard Feynman reminded us, no one can fool us like we can. Protecting yourself from misinformation requires better thinking. When you need reliable information, do you know where to find it and how to use it to make wise decisions? And importantly, are you aware of the thinking errors that might cause you to fall for misleading information? The bottom line is knowledge is not enough. Thinking is power. I'm science educator and communicator Melanie Teresa King. Please visit thinkingispower.com to learn more about critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy skills. Educators can find useful and engaging course materials and assignments for their students. And for a daily-ish dose of better thinking, follow Thinking is Power on X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Hello, everyone. This is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada. and I'm here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 180. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. The FIFA Women's World Cup is over, and it was a great event, even if your favorite team didn't win the top prize. And congrats to the Spanish team that did. The ones who definitely didn't win were the psychics, human or otherwise, who failed to predict the outcomes. Hark back to our great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, where we discovered that only 11% of predictions came true, which is not good odds if you're betting on the outcome. Read on. Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. And for those of you listening, I recommend you have a bag of ketchup chips ready so you can enjoy a snack while I'm reading. WHO holds first traditional medicine summit. The World Health Organization opened its first summit on traditional medicine on Thursday, with the group saying it was seeking to collect evidence and data to allow for the safe use of such treatments. But the global health body has come under fire from critics who accuse it of providing scientific validation to pseudoscience after it asked followers in a post if they had used a range of treatments, including homeopathy and naturopathy. The WHO later said that it had heard the, quote, concerns, end quote, and agreed its, quote, message could have been better articulated, end quote, delivering a clarification. But as one critic, the liver doc, said, quote, your clarification is even worse than your initial post. Do you understand the meaning of science and pseudoscience? End quote. Faith healers are back, and they're getting rich. Spiritual pseudoscience is everywhere on social media with promises to cure diseases. It may also be costing lives. A long case study on a couple facing cancer and a faith healer happy to take advantage of them. Washington Post falls for acupuncture pseudoscience. An article from just over a month ago, but well worth a read if you're interested in how the media promote pseudoscience, sometimes with the best of intentions, and sometimes just with sloppy journalism. The scientific truth behind haunted homes. Quote, there may be a scientific explanation behind so-called hauntings, but we're not all convinced, end quote. Interesting discussion on the role of carbon monoxide in convincing people strange things are going on, and the background to the development of the theory. Is Meghan Markle's anti-stress patch just pseudoscience? I think we know the answer. The answer is yes. But, for the record, photos revealed a mysterious blue patch attached to Markle's wrist. Although at first glance it appeared to look like a sticker, it was quickly revealed to be a $4 gadget designed to send calming signals to the brain. Update: Skepticon 2023. Tickets for convention and dinner. Tickets are now available for Skepticon 2023, the 39th Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention. The convention itself will be held on December 2nd through 3rd at the Ian Potter Auditorium in the Kenneth Meyer Building, University of Melbourne, Parkville. There will be a Friday social event on the evening of December 1st and a dinner on Saturday, December 2nd at the St. Andrews Hotel in Fitzroy. Tickets cover 1 and 2 day bookings, full price and concession, as well as the dinner itself. Tickets for online viewing are also available. Keynote speakers include longtime skeptical activist Wikipediatrician and investigator of grief vampires, Susan Gerbic, a favorite with Australian audiences. And Melanie Tracek-King, creator of Thinking is Power, an online resource that provides accessible, critical thinking content. Some of the topics to be covered by other speakers include medical dissenters, pseudo-archaeology, the demonization of plastics, snake oil business, Bayesian reasoning, and the ethical implications of AI. We're working on the September issue of The Skeptic, packed full of essential reading and goodies. A special feature looks at the risks, the critics, and the hoaxes associated with the high-profile days of the golden age of parapsychology. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both. The digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Items of interest. Loch Ness Monster search could stir up a whirlpool of evil. A large search to find the Loch Ness Monster could stir up a, quote, whirlpool of evil, end quote. A leading paranormal investigator has warned. Why don't they ever interview mediocre paranormal investigators? Ron Halliday fears plans to flesh out the elusive beast with drones, infrared cameras, and underwater sound detectors later this month will lead to spirits being unleashed. Organizers are calling the two-day operation the biggest search for the monster in more than 50 years. Halliday explains, quote, "The truth is, there's little evidence that we're dealing with a flesh and blood creature. It's more likely that the loch is home to an unknown spirit form," end quote. We could agree with him on the first part of that quote, but not so much on the second. Shock and horror. Animals and asparagus are wrong. Surprise, surprise. You wouldn't be surprised to learn that psychics in the UK picked the England Lionesses to win the Women's World Cup. Needless to say, they were all wrong. Spain won 1-0. A UK psychic dubbed Mystic Veg, who claims to know the future using asparagus. She's, I guess, an asparamancer. Thought the final game would go to penalties. It didn't. Nonetheless, she continues to get publicity, no doubt due to the ridiculous novelty of tossing asparagus to see how they fall. See how they fall. Meanwhile, in the animal kingdom, there wasn't any greater success. Psychic penguins at Sea Life in Birmingham, they cheated by putting a low wall between the English and Spanish flags. Psychic meerkats in Sussex and psychic parrots in a London zoo all got it wrong. At least a TV show apologized about the parrots' predictions, saying the parrots were liars who were now talking to their lawyers. Some people take this stuff very seriously. We have no idea what psychic animals in Spain predicted. Not much better in Australia, though. Speckles, the psychic croc, predicted an Australian win against England in the semi-final, and they lost 3-1. The handler, with chunks of meat, with flags attached, didn't help Speckles' independence by pulling the England flag out of the way just when the croc was going for it. Didn't help in the long run. The final word on psychic animals and veggies would go to Mediabites, which was for some reason pretty sarcastic about the whole phenomenon. Or you could read this extract from a book called Psychic Animals, Superstition, Science, and Extraordinary Tales for a down-to-earth suggestion as to why animals pick certain sides. Outside of prompting, of course. Silliest long article of the week. Can naturalists use astrology? Quite an amazing double pike with twist and backbending over by an astrologer who never quite explains how astrology works, or what naturalists have to do with it. He does spend most of the article begging skeptics who, he says several times, only look at sun signs. He agrees that, quote, newspaper astrology, end quote, is useless. In fact, he supports astrology with faint praise. Quote, we don't use astrology to make predictions about our characters or about our futures. Astrology has no value as a predictive tool. It is useless for analyzing your personality traits, end quote. So what does it do? And you'll never find out. Well, that's the newsletter. Did you find yourself some yummy ketchup chips to enjoy while I was reading? If you were in Canada, you would have had no trouble. They are a Canadian favorite, though I have to admit that I'm not that fond of them. In fact, musk sticks are more appealing to me. Now, I will try to straighten out some terms here. Chips in Canada, the US, and Australia are crisps in the UK. So ketchup chips are ketchup crisps. The ketchup chip crisps were inspired by the appeal of French fries. And fries are used in the US and Canada, but they're called chips in Australia and the UK. Oh man, this is so confusing. So, the French fries or chips were often eaten with ketchup. According to Vice.com, Hostess, now owned by Frito-Lay, invented the chip in the 1970s, and they have been a Canadian favorite ever since. And they can be found on the shelf under many brands now, with the favorite brand voted by the staff of the Canadian women's magazine Chatelaine being Mrs. Vicky's sweet and spicy ketchup chips. And recently, a story broke about a man and his son who is legally blind and deaf and loves ketchup chips, traveling from Virginia in the United States on a 2-day trip to Niagara Falls in Canada to buy enough ketchup chips, in fact 40 bags, to last a year. The story caught on and companies started sending them box loads of chips and fun t-shirts that said, quote, Ketchup Crew Road Trip, end quote. And finally, before signing off, remember, in Australia, crisps are called chips, and also chips are called chips. Also called hot chips, which are fries when they are sold at Macca's, which I have learned is Australian for McDonald's. Are we all clear now? I'm not sure I am. But until next time, this is Adrienne Hill. Oh my.
It feels like every family has one.
You can summon aliens with your mind. The only reason why we can't see them is because we're impure and they're pure.
They might be your parents, your siblings, your cousins, and your friends.
Look, she believes that lizard people are walking on the face of the earth.
They might be your teachers, your police officers, and your lawyers.
It's just like, if you disagree with us, there are going to be severe consequences.
They could even be your elected representatives.
Everyone is out to get you. Everyone with the PhD and MD, everyone in the government is out to get you personally.
We watched them storm the Capitol of the United States.
I mean, if I'd have told you on January 5th that any group of people would try to overthrow the U.S. government, you said, no, of course not.
We saw them occupy Ottawa.
Scientific proof that racism doesn't exist. Their sources are always, trust me, bro.
But what no one is talking about is how they're destroying relationships.
I don't think people realize how damaging it is to families.
They are QAnon, and these are the stories of the people who love them.
Like, if I play into their fantasies, I can make them believe anything I want.
Look for the Q Dropped podcast on your favorite podcast platform, including YouTube, or go to porthosmedia.net/QDropped.
Now it's time, once again, to go back to those Trove archives at trove.nla.gov.au, of course. Of course, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia, full of digitised newspapers and so on. A veritable catalogue of curiosities. And, of course, an important part of our history. And today we're going to be looking at something very interesting from history, of course. The Curse of the Pharaoh, or Egyptian curses. And this is a long-standing fable or myth that people who discovered ancient burial sites in Egypt in the early 1910s, 1920s, and so on, were subject thereafter to horrible death and curses and all sorts of terrible things. And has been borne out by many investigations. Of course, people who did that were no more likely to die of strange reasons or die young than anybody else. Maybe that's a topic for another day, getting into that. But let's have a look at how the Pharaoh's curse, or the curse of the Pharaoh, or similar curses, have been reported on in the pages of Australian newspapers. And we turn first to the Argus from Melbourne, Victoria, dated the 26th of January, 1934. Pharaoh's Curse. Superstition revived. Boston, January 24. The superstition that the curse of the pharaohs falls on anyone who disturbs the graves of the ancient Egyptian kings has been revived on the news that Mr. Albert Lithgow, and that's an interesting spelling of the word Lithgow, Lythgoe, I presume that's Lithgow, curator emeritus at the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art, is in hospital in Boston, suffering from a baffling malady. Mr. Lithgow was present when the late Earl of Carnarvon opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1923. His condition is critical. And it says at the bottom here, in parentheses, the Earl of Carnarvon, who was keenly interested in Egypt archaeology, and Mr. Howard Carter, in excavating near Thebes in February 1923, discovered the tomb of the Egyptian king Tutankhamun. Lord Carnarvon died on the 5th of April 1923 from the results of a mosquito bite and pneumonia. The superstitious attributed his death to Pharaoh's curse. Mr. Howard Carter is still engaged in archaeological work in Egypt. And I believe that story is quite true. Lord Carnarvon did die after being bitten by a mosquito, and I think that that bite became infected. And now let's go to the year 1930. The Mail from Adelaide, South Australia, on the 22nd of February. Laughs at curse. Superstition of fools. London, February 21. For more than 30 years I have dug up mummies in ancient lands. No curse has descended on me, though I have lived 72 years, said Sir Ernest A.W. Budge today. He was referring to the supposed Tutankhamun curse. Smiling through gold-rimmed spectacles and shaking his snow-white beard, he said, I have seen ignorant Egyptian peasants burn mummies which, impregnated with bitumen, burned merrily and order warm coffee. The curse does not seem to have descended upon them. Do you not think that those who supposedly died under a curse would have died anyhow? Sir Ernest said there was nothing in the tombs that could have poisoned them. There were no curses written on the tombs. The only Egyptian curses were written on papyrus and were directed against those damaging and stealing books. The curse may descend on me, and I might die tonight, but I am not afraid of that, he continued. I was always careful to rebury any mummy. It is the only decent method of treating human remains. Lord Carnarvon died owing to encephalitis due to a mosquito bite. There was not any curse about that. Sir Ernest was keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian Antiquities, British Museum, 1893 to 1924. He is the author of a large number of historical publications. So there you go. Good old Sir Ernest A.W. Budge, not having a bar of superstition. Now let's see what the Western Argus from Western Australia had to say in 1924, very close to the time of the excavations or the discoveries in question. On November the 25th, superstition of a curse. Mr. H.G. Evelyn White, the Leeds University lecturer and Egyptologist who recently shot himself in a taxicab, wrote in a letter which was read at the inquest. I knew there was a curse on me, though I had leave to take these manuscripts to Cairo. The monks told me the curse would work all the same. Now it has done so. The Leeds correspondent of the London Morning Post states, the manuscripts referred to in the letter are indubitably a number of parchment fragments in Coptic and Arabic, including apocryphal books which Mr. White found in an ancient monastery in the Wadi Nazram region of Egypt. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. The story of his discoveries of these reads almost like a chapter of fiction. They lay in a secret chamber of a monastery to which monks only knew the secret of entry. They had been guarded carefully for centuries, and only once was it recorded that alien hands had disturbed them. And I'm sure they don't mean space aliens in this instance. The dust of years had gathered on them, and the secret was long preserved. Mr. White came along, learnt the secret, and had the privilege of examining the documents. Why he, rather than another, should be shown the hidden chamber and its precious contents only can be conjectured. Be that as it may, he examined the manuscripts and was amazed and delighted that here was material of inestimable archaeological value. He obtained sanction for their removal to the Coptic Museum at Cairo, and it was then that the monks must have told him of the curse upon him. The late Lord Carnarvon. Superstition clings almost ineradicably to the ancient things of the East, not only to tombs and the sacred things of dead mummies and the personal ornaments and utensils of those who are with Isis and Osiris. Even the laborious handiwork of age-old writers would seem to carry with it the curse of black magic. When the late Lord Carnarvon was engaged in the investigation of the Tutankhamun tomb, it was said that a curse would fall upon him for the, quote, violation and desecration, end quote, of the last resting place of an ancient prince of Egypt. It was for the superstitious to say, quote, I told you so, end quote, when, shortly afterwards, Lord Carnarvon's death took place. Whether Mr. White must have thought at the time about the curse which was said to rest upon him, it is evident that latterly his highly strung nature was disturbed to its foundation by the unfortunate affair of Miss Maynard. This strange message from the monks had come insidiously back to add to the worry and nervous strain of his last few months. An epitaph. Among the sincerest mourners of Mr. White are his former students. One who learnt Greek from him has fittingly commemorated a loved teacher in an epitaph in the manner of Simonides of the Greek anthology. Translated, it runs, He loved books and men. Would that he had been as gentle to himself as he was to them. Miss Helen Maynard, whose death culminated in the double tragedy, was buried in Woodhouse Cemetery, not 50 yards from the university building in which Mr. White gave many of his distinguished lectures on classics. I wonder what the side story of that is all about. Now let's look in the pages of the Nambucca and Bellinger News from New South Wales, dated the 24th of March 1933. Ancient Egypt. Tut's curse, a myth. Dr. Howard Carter, the sole survivor of that little party which, led by the late Lord Carnarvon, discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, has left once more for Egypt. Before going, he proved himself the first really human archaeologist I have met, writes a Sunday Express representative. He answered questions I have longed to ask an Egyptologist, and answered them so that they were intelligible to a mere layman. Question: why do the Egyptology section of museums bore me stiff? I asked him. Because of the fetish age in this century. Actually, the stones of which some of our museums are built are a good deal older than some of the stone works from Egypt, which they shelter. Because of the things they have seen in our museum, most people imagine Egypt art to be composed of great chunks of stone with some crude drawing chiseled on them. That is rubbish. Their work was as good as that of any period. The state of civilization in ancient Egypt was, in some ways, as great as our own. In the matter of hygiene, for instance, they had baths more generally in use than we have, and they were shower baths too. There are masses of treasures still to be discovered, but of course, since the 28 kings have been accounted for, there will be no world-shaking discoveries such as that of Tutankhamun. Asked about the curse which was said to have been placed on all who assisted in the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, Dr. Carter laughed. That is pure nonsensical invention. There is more often than not an inscription of welcome on the walls of the tombs in Egypt. Where the story of the curse came from, I have not an idea. I am off to the desert again. So there we are, the curses of ancient Egypt and not so ancient Egypt in the pages of Australian newspapers. And you can discover all sorts of other curses and evil things, maybe, when you visit Trove at trove.nla.gov.au. And hopefully you're not cursed, because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week. And as I said at the top... What is that? What is it? It's like a crow, a raven? Is this an omen? Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week. As I said at the top of the show, next week's episode will be coming to you from Bend up in Oregon. And this Tuesday night, here in the United States, I will be conducting my skeptical box of tricks, spoon bending, water divining, power balance tricks, and making a little bit of origami as well. This will be on the 29th of August from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Poorhouse Grill in Bend, Oregon. For further information, follow the links on this week's show notes, or just go to facebook.com/groups/Bend Nerds, one word. Nerd Night presents Richard Saunders' Skeptical Box of Tricks. My host will be Brian Dunning from the Skeptoid podcast, and I hope to record a report about the night at the time. Thank you to all those people who continue to support me and the Skeptic Zone team by your weekly contributions at PayPal or Patreon, or by the odd donation here and there. And you can find out more at skepticzone.tv. Just follow the links. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Oakland, California.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Hello to the people who listen after the music, when the music stops, and with our new, what do you call it? Our new outro, our new ending bit with Maynard. Thank you, Maynard, for recording that. It was about time that was updated. It's the dice game, and this is where I roll a 10-sided die, or a 6, or a 30, or a 60, or whatever. 10 today. I roll it 3 times, or maybe 4, and you use your amazing skeptical, your amazing psychic predicting power to, well, predict what I'm going to roll. I've put the dice in a little container. So it's rattling around, so it doesn't roll on the carpet or anything like that. So here we go. We're going to roll this, so you can choose. You can use your psychic power 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. And it rests on number 7. Number 7. Here we go for the next time. Use your powers. And it rests, well, on number 7 again. How about that? What are the chances? One more time. Here it comes. 8. 7, 7, 8. And yes, there's a supplementary. One more number. Here it comes. 1. Sounds like an address. Where do you live? I live at 7,781. 7781 are this week's lucky numbers.